Sophia Bennett stood at the top of a city that worshipped power and success. Beneath her empire of glass towers and glowing wealth, she ruled silently and relentlessly. Most people saw a billionaire queen shaped by ambition and control. Few ever noticed the loneliness buried beneath her flawless reputation and perfectly structured life. Every morning felt like a repeat of discipline, pressure, and emotional silence she had learned to accept. Before sunrise, Sophia completed her strict routine inside her private penthouse gym overlooking the city skyline. The world outside still slept while she pushed her body through controlled precision and discipline. Her movements were sharp, efficient, and emotionless, as if every breath had a purpose. Even her reflection in the mirror looked distant, as though success had slowly replaced her humanity over the years. By early morning, she sat alone at a long dining table inside her luxury residence. Fresh coffee steamed beside untouched elegance, while financial reports filled her tablet screen. Her chef spoke carefully about her skipped meals and restless nights, but Sophia responded without looking up. Work always came first, because stopping meant remembering everything she had buried under achievement and responsibility. Her assistant Clara called shortly after, delivering updates about investors, construction projects, and media demands. Sophia listened while driving through the city in her black luxury car. Every message added weight to her already overloaded world. Pressure never stopped, and expectations never softened. She convinced herself this was control, but deep inside it felt more like emotional imprisonment disguised as success. When the conversation ended, silence returned inside the car, heavy and uncomfortable. Rain clouds gathered above the city like unspoken tension waiting to fall. Sophia tightened her grip on the steering wheel and focused on the road ahead. For a brief moment, her thoughts drifted back to Michael Anderson, the man she once loved before ambition consumed everything else in her life. Michael had been her only memory of softness and vulnerability. Back then, she was not a billionaire, but an ambitious student with fragile dreams. They built hopes together under quiet campus nights, believing the future would always stay on their side. But distance, pressure, and ambition slowly broke what once felt unshakable. Eventually, silence replaced love, and Sophia buried the pain under success. That morning, she chose to personally inspect one of her largest construction projects outside the city. Abuja Heights represented billions in investment and the future of her empire. She preferred handling important matters herself because trust had become something she rarely gave freely. The drive toward the outskirts felt peaceful at first, almost like a rare escape from her overwhelming world. But everything changed when her luxury car suddenly jerked violently on an empty road, surrounded by open land. Warning lights flashed across the dashboard while smoke rose from beneath the hood. The engine died completely, leaving silence heavier than before. Sophia stared forward in disbelief, frustration rising instantly as she realized even her control over life could fail without warning. No signal appeared on her phone, and no assistance responded to her attempts. Rain began falling softly, turning the empty road into a cold and isolating space. She stepped out reluctantly, her expensive heels sinking slightly into wet ground. The world felt unfamiliar outside her controlled environment, as if power meant nothing in moments like this. She opened the hood and stared at the damaged engine with visible irritation. Several passing cars ignored her presence completely, not recognizing the billionaire standing helpless in the rain. For the first time in years, her status meant nothing. She crossed her arms tightly, annoyed and uncomfortable, as silence stretched endlessly around her broken vehicle. Then headlights appeared in the distance, approaching slowly along the empty road. An old pickup truck stopped beside her car, breaking the isolation. A man stepped out, tall and calm, dressed simply in worn clothes that carried signs of hard work. He studied the situation quietly before speaking with ease, asking if she needed help. Sophia remained cautious, but something about his presence felt different from the world she knew. He was not intimidated by her appearance or status. Instead, he focused entirely on the broken engine with calm confidence. When he began repairing it, she watched closely, surprised by his skill and quiet determination under the falling rain. Within minutes, he identified the problem as a damaged ignition wire and fixed it temporarily with simple tools. When the engine started again, Sophia felt unexpected relief mixed with curiosity. She thanked him sincerely, still observing him as if trying to understand who he was. He introduced himself simply as Daniel, and something about his voice stayed with her longer than expected. Before leaving, Sophia found herself doing something unusual and unpredictable. She invited Daniel to have lunch with her the following day, surprising even herself with the suggestion. As their brief encounter ended, she drove away through the rain, unaware that this simple roadside meeting had already begun changing the direction of her carefully controlled life. The next morning, Sophia returned to her world of glass towers and silent pressure. Yet something inside her felt subtly different, as if the rhythm of her thoughts had shifted overnight. Daniel's calm voice still lingered in her memory, refusing to fade like most strangers she had met in passing. She told herself it meant nothing, yet her focus kept slipping in unexpected moments. At Bennett Holdings headquarters, employees greeted her with their usual respect and nervous discipline. The building felt unchanged, but Sophia noticed everything more sharply than before. Every greeting sounded louder, every hallway felt colder, and every expectation weighed heavier than usual. She dismissed the feeling quickly and stepped into her private elevator without slowing down. Inside her office, Vanessa was already waiting with 2 cups of coffee, studying her carefully. Vanessa noticed the smallest changes in Sophia's expression immediately, even when others could not. She teased her lightly at first, but her tone shifted when she saw how distracted Sophia seemed. Vanessa had known her long enough to recognize when something emotional was interfering with control. Sophia denied everything at once, insisting she was simply focused on work. She opened her laptop and buried herself in financial reports, trying to erase the memory of the roadside encounter. But Vanessa continued watching her quietly, unconvinced. Sophia's usual cold efficiency was still there, but something softer kept breaking through at the edges. The truth was simple and dangerous. Sophia had not been affected by business, investors, or global pressure. She had been affected by a stranger who fixed her car in the rain without fear or awe. That fact unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. She refused to analyze it because analyzing emotions always led to vulnerability. By mid-morning, meetings began filling her schedule again. Sophia shifted instantly into CEO mode, sharp and commanding. She reviewed contracts worth millions, corrected senior executives without hesitation, and made decisions that shaped entire industries. Everyone in the room respected her authority, but none of them saw the distraction behind her controlled expression. During a brief break, Vanessa casually asked when Sophia last went on a date. The question landed harder than intended. Sophia paused, irritated by the interruption, and quickly dismissed it. Vanessa didn't push further, but her expression showed concern. She reminded Sophia that she was still a woman beneath all the titles and responsibilities. Sophia rejected the idea immediately. She claimed she had no time for relationships and no interest in emotional complications. Yet Vanessa noticed something deeper beneath her words. It was not just lack of time, it was avoidance. Sophia was protecting herself from something she refused to face again. Later that afternoon, Daniel's name came up again unexpectedly when Sophia's assistant mentioned a scheduled meeting update. The mention alone made her pause for half a second before recovering her composure. She told herself it was coincidence, but her mind had already begun connecting moments she tried to ignore. Meanwhile, Daniel was already on his way to Bennett Holdings, holding a simple file containing his credentials. He hesitated outside the massive glass building, overwhelmed by its scale and presence. Everything about the environment reminded him of a world he had never belonged to, yet was now being invited into. Inside the elevator, he stared at his reflection, questioning whether someone like Sophia would even remember him. He assumed the meeting would be brief, maybe formal, maybe forgettable. He did not know that Sophia had already prepared something far more life-changing than he expected. When Daniel finally entered Sophia's office, the atmosphere shifted instantly. The silence between them carried a strange weight, not uncomfortable, but unfamiliar. Sophia studied him carefully while he stood respectfully near the entrance. For a moment, neither of them spoke, as if both were adjusting to the reality of seeing each other again. Sophia finally gestured for him to sit, her tone calm and professional. Daniel placed his file on the desk, explaining briefly why he had come. He did not exaggerate, did not plead, and did not attempt to impress her. He simply told the truth, and that honesty stood out in a world built on performance. As she reviewed his documents, Sophia's expression slowly changed. His academic record was exceptional, far beyond what she expected from someone working roadside repairs. There was intelligence, discipline, and consistency reflected in every page. For the first time that day, her focus was not divided by distraction, but by genuine interest. Without hesitation, Sophia made a decision that shocked even Daniel. She offered him a position at Bennett Holdings. The words landed like reality breaking through disbelief. Daniel struggled to process them, repeating the question as if confirmation could change its meaning. But Sophia remained calm, certain, and unshaken. For Sophia, the decision was not emotional on the surface, but something deeper had influenced it. She recognized potential where others had ignored it, and something about Daniel's honesty made her trust her judgment. For Daniel, it felt like a door opening that had been locked his entire life. As he left the building that day, Daniel carried something he had not felt in years: hope. And inside her office, Sophia sat quietly for a moment longer than usual, staring at the empty space he had just occupied. She did not understand why, but the world suddenly felt slightly less predictable than before. Daniel's first day at Bennett Holdings arrived faster than he expected. Standing outside the towering glass building, he felt the weight of a world that had always existed far beyond his reach. The polished lobby, the sharp silence, and the confident footsteps of employees made him feel like a visitor in someone else's life. Yet he kept moving forward because turning back was no longer an option. Inside, the receptionist already recognized his name. That alone surprised him. A visitor pass was prepared for him instantly, and he was directed toward the executive elevator. Every small detail confirmed that Sophia had already made arrangements for him. That realization unsettled him in a strange way, because it meant she had thought about him after he left. As the elevator rose, Daniel stared at his reflection in the mirrored walls. He adjusted his shirt slightly, suddenly aware of how ordinary he looked compared to the world he was entering. Doubt crept in quietly. He wondered if he truly belonged in a place built for people like Sophia, not people like him. When the doors opened, Clara greeted him politely and guided him towards Sophia's office. The atmosphere on the executive floor was calm but powerful, filled with quiet authority. Daniel could feel eyes on him as he walked. Though no one said anything directly, he understood immediately that he stood out. Inside the office, Sophia was already working. She looked composed, elegant, and distant in a way that made the room feel colder. For a moment, Daniel almost forgot how to speak. The memory of the roadside rain returned briefly, contrasting sharply with the controlled environment around her now. Sophia finally looked up and acknowledged him. Her voice was calm, professional, and slightly distant, but not unkind. She asked him to sit. Daniel obeyed quietly, placing his file carefully on the desk between them. The silence that followed felt heavy but not hostile, as if both were measuring something invisible. As Sophia opened his credentials, her expression slowly shifted. She scanned line after line, reading about his engineering degree, his academic achievements, and his technical skills. Daniel watched her carefully, unsure of what she was thinking. He had spent his life being overlooked, so expectation was not something he trusted. But Sophia did not overlook him. Instead, she studied him with increasing focus, as if seeing something others had missed. Her silence stretched longer than Daniel was comfortable with, but he stayed still. He had learned long ago not to interrupt judgment. Finally, she closed the file. Her decision came without hesitation or hesitation. She told him he was hired. The words landed so suddenly that Daniel thought he misunderstood. He repeated it in disbelief, trying to confirm reality. But Sophia remained firm, calm, and completely certain. For Daniel, the moment felt unreal. Years of rejection, struggle, and disappointment collided with a single sentence. He did not know how to respond properly, so he simply sat there, overwhelmed by a feeling he had almost forgotten. Hope felt unfamiliar, almost dangerous. Sophia observed his reaction quietly. She noticed he did not celebrate loudly or react with desperation. Instead, he absorbed it slowly, as if trying to believe it was real. That restraint made her respect him more than she expected. Most people in his position would have begged or exaggerated gratitude. After he left her office, Sophia remained seated longer than usual. She told herself it was just another hiring decision, another operational adjustment. But something about Daniel lingered in her thoughts. Not his skills, not his resume, but the way he looked at her without fear or performance. Meanwhile, Daniel stepped out of the building into the busy city air. The world outside felt different, brighter, almost unstable. He checked the letter again, still unsure if it was real. For the first time in years, he walked without feeling invisible. And that feeling terrified him slightly. Over the following days, Daniel adapted quickly to his new role. He learned systems fast, asked thoughtful questions, and earned quiet respect from colleagues. Unlike others, he did not try to impress anyone. He simply worked with consistency and focus, which made him stand out even more inside a competitive environment. Sophia noticed everything. She noticed how he treated junior staff with respect, how he listened carefully during meetings, and how he never tried to dominate conversations. There was no arrogance in him, only grounded confidence shaped by experience rather than privilege. Vanessa, however, noticed something else. She saw the subtle changes in Sophia. The longer glances, the distracted moments, the way her tone softened slightly whenever Daniel's name appeared in conversation. Vanessa questioned her gently, but Sophia always dismissed it immediately. Sophia insisted she was simply evaluating a valuable employee. She refused to acknowledge anything deeper. But Vanessa had known her too long to accept surface explanations. She could see that Daniel had reached a part of Sophia that no business deal or investor ever had. One afternoon, Sophia watched Daniel on a construction site from a distance. He was speaking with engineers, explaining adjustments with calm confidence. Workers listened to him attentively, not because of authority, but because of trust. That moment stayed with her longer than she expected. That evening, she called him into her office. The conversation was brief but meaningful. She acknowledged his performance while Daniel responded modestly, almost dismissively of his own success. Their exchange felt natural, but underneath it, something unspoken continued to grow. When Daniel pointed out that she had not eaten, Sophia found herself laughing unexpectedly. It was a small moment, but rare enough to feel significant. She realized she had not laughed like that in a long time, not in a way that felt unforced or real. Daniel's concern for her work habits surprised her later in the conversation. He spoke honestly about burnout, pressure, and balance. Most people would never dare to speak to her that way. Yet Daniel did it without fear, only care. That difference unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. After he left, Sophia stood by the window for a long time, looking at the city lights. She told herself it was nothing. Just work, just adjustment, just coincidence. But deep inside, she knew something had already begun shifting, quietly and irreversibly. Daniel's presence at Bennett Holdings slowly became part of the company's rhythm. At first, he was simply the new engineer, quietly observing systems, learning procedures, and adapting to a world built on precision and pressure. But over time, people began to notice something different about him. He did not compete for attention. He earned respect through consistency and calm focus. Sophia observed him more than she admitted, even to herself. She told herself it was supervision, part of her responsibility as CEO. Yet her attention kept drifting toward him during meetings and site visits. Daniel spoke with engineers as equals, listened carefully before responding, and never tried to impress anyone with status or ego. Vanessa noticed the shift immediately. She saw how Sophia's gaze softened slightly whenever Daniel entered a room. She saw the subtle pauses in Sophia's focus when his name was mentioned. Vanessa did not comment directly at first, but her silence carried meaning that Sophia refused to acknowledge. Sophia continued denying any emotional connection, insisting Daniel was simply a capable employee. But her actions often contradicted her words. She found herself reviewing his reports personally, ensuring his projects were progressing smoothly, and paying attention to details she would normally delegate without thought. Daniel, meanwhile, remained unaware of the deeper attention he was receiving. To him, Sophia was still his CEO, brilliant, intimidating, and distant. He respected her deeply, not only for giving him a chance, but for treating him like someone capable rather than invisible. That respect shaped every interaction they had. One afternoon at a construction site, Sophia stood on an elevated platform, watching Daniel guide a group of engineers through structural adjustments. His confidence had grown noticeably since his first day. There was no hesitation in his voice anymore, only clarity and purpose. Workers listened to him naturally, as if trust came easily to his leadership. Sophia felt something unfamiliar watching that moment. It was not just admiration for his skill, but recognition of something deeper. Daniel did not carry the arrogance often found in successful men. His confidence came from struggle, not privilege. That difference stayed with her long after she left the site. Later that evening, Sophia called Daniel into her office again. The meeting was supposed to be routine feedback on performance, but it carried a different tone. She acknowledged his progress, noting how quickly he had adapted and how well he had integrated into the team. Daniel responded modestly, as always, not exaggerating his achievements. Their conversation was professional, yet something softer lingered beneath it. Small pauses, brief eye contact, and quiet understanding filled the space between sentences. Neither of them addressed it directly, but both felt it growing in ways they did not fully understand yet. At one point, Daniel noticed Sophia had not eaten properly again. He mentioned it casually, without judgment, but with genuine concern. Sophia reacted with a brief smile, almost surprised by the attention. It was not about business or performance. It was personal, and that made it unusual in her world. Sophia brushed it off at first, insisting she was fine, but Daniel did not push aggressively. He simply observed quietly, as if understanding her without needing explanations. That patience unsettled her more than confrontation would have. She was used to control, not gentle persistence. After Daniel left, Sophia remained in her office longer than necessary. She looked out at the city lights stretching endlessly beyond her glass walls. Everything in her life was structured, measured, and predictable. Yet Daniel's presence disrupted that order in subtle, unexplainable ways. Vanessa entered shortly afterward and immediately noticed Sophia's silence. She did not ask direct questions, but instead made a comment about Sophia's distraction. Sophia denied it again, more sharply this time. Vanessa only smiled faintly, unconvinced, and warned her softly about emotional blindness. Sophia dismissed the warning, but it stayed with her longer than she expected. Later that night, she found herself reviewing Daniel's file again, despite having already memorized it. His background, his achievements, his struggles, all of it painted a picture she could not easily ignore. The next day, Daniel's presence in a high-level meeting changed the atmosphere again. He contributed thoughtfully, offering insights that surprised even senior executives. Sophia watched him carefully, noticing how naturally he handled pressure without arrogance or fear. After the meeting, several executives privately praised Daniel's potential. Sophia listened without reacting outwardly, but internally she felt a quiet confirmation of what she had already sensed. He was not ordinary, he never had been. That evening, Sophia and Daniel shared another brief conversation in her office. It began with work, but slowly drifted into something more relaxed. Daniel spoke lightly about life outside the company, while Sophia responded with rare openness. The boundaries between professional and personal began to blur slightly. Daniel's presence brought a strange sense of ease into her tightly controlled world. She found herself laughing more often, even in small moments she would normally overlook. Each interaction added something subtle but significant to the growing connection between them. When Daniel finally left that night, Sophia stood again by the window, watching the city glow beneath her. She told herself it was still just work, still just coincidence, but deep down she understood the truth was becoming harder to deny with each passing day. Daniel's presence inside Bennett Holdings continued to grow from something temporary into something quietly essential. What began as a simple employment opportunity slowly evolved into a deeper professional trust. Teams that once hesitated around him now sought his input. His ideas were practical, grounded, and shaped by real-world experience rather than theory alone. Sophia watched this transformation closely, though she never admitted how often she noticed it. Daniel was no longer just the man she met on a rainy roadside. He had become a steady force inside her company, someone who brought balance to environments often dominated by pressure and ego. His calmness stood out even in the most stressful meetings. Vanessa, however, became increasingly concerned about Sophia's emotional state. She saw how Sophia's attention kept drifting toward Daniel even during serious discussions. Sophia still insisted it was professional interest, But Vanessa recognized the subtle difference between observation and attachment. She warned her again, gently but firmly, that emotions were beginning to influence judgment. Sophia rejected the idea immediately. She claimed she was simply evaluating a valuable employee whose performance impacted the company's future. But even as she spoke those words, she felt an internal contradiction she refused to explore. Daniel's presence had already started affecting her focus in ways she could not fully control. Daniel himself remained unaware of the deeper emotional shifts around him. He continued working with discipline, arriving early, staying late, and treating every task with seriousness. He never attempted to cross boundaries or assume familiarity. His respect for Sophia remained consistent, grounded in gratitude and admiration. One afternoon, Sophia observed Daniel leading a technical review with senior engineers. His confidence had grown noticeably. He spoke with clarity, explained solutions without hesitation, and handled objections calmly. There was no arrogance in his tone, only quiet certainty shaped by experience and intelligence. Sophia found herself studying him longer than necessary. She told herself it was because he was an important hire, someone she had personally selected. But deep down, she recognized something else. Daniel did not behave like someone trying to impress power. He behaved like someone who had survived without it. Later that day, Sophia called him into her office again, under the pretense of reviewing project updates. Daniel entered respectfully, carrying documents neatly organized. The conversation began formally, focused on performance metrics and upcoming deadlines. Yet the atmosphere slowly softened as they spoke. Small moments of pause and eye contact began to replace strict professionalism. Daniel responded honestly to questions without exaggeration, and Sophia found herself listening more closely than usual. There was something steady about his presence that made conversations feel less transactional and more human. At one point, Daniel casually mentioned that Sophia had not taken proper breaks recently. It was not said as criticism, but as concern. Sophia initially dismissed it, but the simplicity of his observation lingered longer than expected. Few people spoke to her that way, and even fewer cared enough to notice. She told him she was fine, as she always did. Daniel did not argue. Instead, he simply nodded and accepted her answer without pressure. That response unsettled her slightly more than confrontation would have. It revealed patience, not control, and that made it harder to dismiss. After Daniel left, Sophia remained seated at her desk longer than usual. The office felt quieter than normal, despite being in the middle of a busy building. She stood up and walked toward the window, looking out over the city she had built her life around. Everything appeared the same, yet felt subtly different. Vanessa entered shortly after, noticing immediately that Sophia was distracted again. She made a light comment, but her tone carried concern. Sophia responded defensively, insisting she was focused on work. Vanessa did not argue, but her expression showed she was unconvinced by the explanation. Later that evening, Sophia reviewed Daniel's file once more, even though she already knew its contents. She traced his academic history, his achievements, and his struggles. Each detail reinforced the same conclusion she had been avoiding. Daniel was not ordinary. His life had shaped him in ways that made him resilient and grounded. The next few weeks followed a similar pattern. Daniel continued excelling quietly within the company, earning respect from colleagues and supervisors alike. Sophia continued noticing him more than she intended, often catching herself observing him during moments she should have been focused elsewhere. Despite her internal resistance, something in her perception of Daniel was changing. He no longer felt like just an employee or a chance encounter. He felt increasingly present in her thoughts, even when he was not physically around. That realization disturbed her more than she was willing to admit. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Sophia and Daniel shared another brief conversation in her office. It started with work, but gradually shifted into lighter topics. Daniel spoke about his past experiences with surprising humor, and Sophia found herself responding with rare ease. For a brief moment, the tension that usually defined her world seemed to fade. There were no contracts, no expectations, no pressure from investors or the media. Just conversation between two people who, against all logic, had begun to understand each other in ways neither had planned. When Daniel finally left, Sophia stood once again by the window overlooking the city lights. She told herself firmly that nothing had changed. It was just work, just coincidence, just routine. But somewhere beneath her carefully controlled thoughts, she knew that explanation was no longer convincing. Daniel's role at Bennett Holdings began to expand beyond expectations. What started as a junior engineering position slowly evolved into something more influential. His technical insight, combined with practical field experience, made him increasingly valuable during high-level discussions. Senior engineers began consulting him regularly, and even executives started acknowledging his input with growing respect. Sophia observed this shift with quiet attention. She never publicly commented on it, but she noticed every detail. Daniel did not try to dominate conversations or assert authority unnecessarily. Instead, he contributed only when necessary, and when he did, his words carried weight. That balance between humility and intelligence stood out in her world of constant ambition. Vanessa continued to watch Sophia carefully. She noticed that Sophia's routine had subtly changed. Meetings that once consumed her entirely were now occasionally interrupted by brief pauses whenever Daniel's name appeared. Sophia still denied any emotional involvement, but Vanessa could see the difference growing more difficult to hide. Sophia insisted repeatedly that Daniel was simply a capable employee, nothing more. But her actions often contradicted her words. She reviewed his work personally more than required, approved his recommendations faster than others, and occasionally adjusted her schedule when he was involved in key projects. Daniel remained consistent in his behavior. He showed no interest in status or corporate hierarchy beyond his responsibilities. He treated everyone equally, from junior staff to senior managers. This earned him quiet admiration across the company, but he remained unaware of the deeper attention Sophia paid to him. One afternoon, Sophia watched Daniel during a technical briefing. He was explaining structural adjustments to a group of engineers with calm precision. There was no hesitation in his voice, only clarity. Workers listened closely, not because of authority imposed, but because of trust naturally earned. That moment stayed with Sophia longer than she expected. She had seen countless professionals in her life, many of them powerful and intelligent. Yet Daniel's presence felt different. He did not rely on status or fear to command attention. He relied on understanding. Later that evening, Daniel was called into Sophia's office for a project update. The meeting began formally, as always, with reports and technical details. Sophia maintained her professional tone, but the atmosphere gradually softened as the conversation continued. Daniel answered questions directly and honestly, without exaggeration or hesitation. Sophia found herself listening more carefully than usual, not just to his words, but to the way he thought. There was a clarity in him that felt refreshing in contrast to the corporate world she controlled. At one point, Daniel mentioned casually that Sophia had been skipping meals again. It was said lightly, without pressure, but it landed differently. Sophia paused briefly, slightly surprised that he had noticed something so personal without being told. She dismissed it immediately, insisting she was fine. Daniel did not push further. He simply accepted her answer and moved on. That restraint unsettled her more than insistence would have. It felt like respect rather than control, and that was rare in her life. After Daniel left, Sophia remained in her office longer than necessary. The city lights outside shimmered against the glass walls, but her focus was elsewhere. She stood and walked slowly toward the window, lost in thought she refused to name. Vanessa entered shortly after and immediately sensed the shift in atmosphere. She commented gently on Sophia's distraction, but Sophia responded defensively, insisting everything was work-related. Vanessa did not argue, but her silence carried doubt. Later that night, Sophia reviewed Daniel's file again, despite already knowing every detail. She looked at his academic history, his achievements, and his struggles. Each line reinforced what she already suspected, but refused to fully acknowledge. Daniel was not just competent, he was resilient in a way that came from survival, not privilege. That difference made him stand out in her world more than she expected or was comfortable admitting. Over the following weeks, Daniel continued to grow within the company. His reputation strengthened, and his presence became more central to key projects. He remained humble, consistent, and focused, never allowing success to change his behavior or attitude. Sophia's awareness of him also continued to grow, even as she tried to maintain emotional distance. She found herself noticing him in moments she did not plan to. thinking about his input during unrelated decisions and anticipating his reactions in professional discussions. Despite her resistance, Daniel had become part of her mental landscape in a way she could no longer ignore. It was subtle but persistent, like a thought that returned no matter how often she pushed it away. One evening, after a long day of work, they shared another brief conversation in her office. It started as business, but gradually softened into something more natural. Daniel spoke with ease, and Sophia responded without her usual emotional barriers fully intact. For a short moment, the weight of her world felt lighter. There were no negotiations, no expectations, no pressure from investors or public image. Just conversation between two people, slowly learning each other's rhythm. When Daniel finally left, Sophia remained by the window for a long time, watching the city glow beneath her. She told herself again that nothing had changed, that everything was still under control. But deep inside, she already knew that control was beginning to slip in ways she could not easily reverse. Daniel's influence inside Bennett Holdings continued to grow quietly but unmistakably. He was no longer just a newly hired engineer learning the system. He had become someone whose input was requested in strategic meetings, someone whose opinions carried weight beyond his title. His rise did not come from ambition for power, but from consistency, clarity, and results that could not be ignored. Sophia noticed this evolution with increasing attention. She told herself it was simply good business practice to monitor a promising employee. Yet her awareness of Daniel extended beyond professional interest. She found herself anticipating his responses during meetings, listening more carefully when he spoke, and unconsciously valuing his perspective more than others. Vanessa, on the other hand, became more direct in her observations. She saw how Sophia's emotional distance toward Daniel was no longer as firm as before. Sophia still maintained control in public, but small private moments revealed hesitation, distraction, and unspoken curiosity that Vanessa could not ignore. Despite all of this, Sophia continued to deny anything personal. She insisted that Daniel was simply a valuable asset to the company. But her behavior told a different story. She often requested updates on his projects specifically, reviewed his reports more thoroughly than others, and paid attention to his progress in ways she did not admit even to herself. Daniel remained unaware of the deeper emotional shifts around him. He continued working with quiet discipline, treating every task seriously and respectfully. He never attempted to step outside professional boundaries, and his humility remained constant even as his responsibilities increased. One afternoon, Daniel led a critical technical discussion involving senior engineers and project managers. His explanation of structural improvements was clear and confident. There was no hesitation, no overcomplication, only practical solutions based on real-world understanding. The team responded to him with growing trust. Sophia observed the entire exchange from a distance. What struck her most was not just his intelligence, but his presence. Daniel did not demand authority, he earned attention naturally. In a world filled with ego and competition, his calm confidence stood out more than she expected. Later that evening, Daniel was called into Sophia's office again for a routine project review. The setting was familiar, yet something about the atmosphere felt slightly different. The conversation began formally, focused on technical updates, but gradually shifted into a more relaxed tone as they continued speaking. Daniel answered questions with the same honesty he always displayed. He did not exaggerate achievements or attempt to impress her. Sophia found herself listening more intently than usual, not just to his words, but to the way he thought through problems. There was a grounded intelligence in him that felt rare in her world. During the conversation, Daniel casually pointed out that Sophia had been neglecting her meals again. It was not said as criticism, but as concern. Sophia paused briefly, caught off guard by the observation. Very few people noticed details about her personal habits, and even fewer felt comfortable mentioning them. She dismissed it quickly, insisting she was fine. Daniel did not argue. He simply accepted her response and moved on. That quiet acceptance lingered with her longer than she expected. It was not pressure or control, but awareness and care without demand. After Daniel left, Sophia remained alone in her office. The city stretched endlessly beyond the glass walls, glowing with movement and life. Yet her attention was not on the city. It was on the silence Daniel left behind, a silence that felt different from the emptiness she was used to. Vanessa entered shortly after and immediately sensed the shift in Sophia's mood. She made a light comment about distraction, but Sophia responded more sharply than necessary. Vanessa did not push further, but her concern deepened as she continued observing her friend's behavior. That night, Sophia found herself reviewing Daniel's records again. She told herself it was for work evaluation purposes, but she had already read them multiple times. Each time she revisited his background, she noticed something new in how his life had been shaped by hardship and persistence. Daniel's journey was not defined by privilege or opportunity, but by resilience. He had been forced to build himself repeatedly after every setback. That realization created an uncomfortable respect within Sophia, one she struggled to categorize as purely professional. Over the following days, Daniel's presence became even more integrated into the company's operations. His contributions were increasingly central to important decisions. He remained consistent, humble, and focused, never allowing recognition to alter his behavior or personality. Sophia, meanwhile, found it harder to separate professional evaluation from personal awareness. She began noticing his expressions in quieter moments, the way he spoke when he was not trying to impress anyone, and the calm stability he brought into high-pressure environments. Even when she tried to focus entirely on business, her thoughts occasionally drifted toward him without permission. It was subtle but persistent, like a background process running in her mind that she could not fully shut down. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Daniel stopped by her office briefly. The conversation was short and informal, but it carried a sense of ease that had become increasingly familiar between them. For a few minutes, the usual corporate tension faded. When he left, Sophia remained standing near the window for a long time. She told herself again that nothing had changed, that everything was still under control. But deep inside, she understood something she was not ready to admit aloud. Control was no longer as absolute as it once was. Daniel's presence at Bennett Holdings had become so natural that people no longer saw him as new. He was no longer the outsider who arrived with uncertainty and hesitation. Instead, he had become part of the company's rhythm, someone whose voice carried quiet authority in technical discussions and project decisions. Sophia noticed this transformation more than anyone else. She told herself it was simply professional acknowledgement of talent, but the truth felt more complicated each day. Daniel was no longer just an employee she had hired on impulse. He was becoming a fixed presence in her thoughts, even when she tried to focus elsewhere. Vanessa grew increasingly concerned as she watched Sophia's emotional restraint weaken in subtle ways. Sophia still maintained her composed exterior, but moments of distraction became more frequent. She would pause mid-conversation, lose focus during meetings, or briefly fall silent when Daniel was mentioned unexpectedly. Sophia continued to deny any personal connection. She insisted Daniel was valuable to the company and nothing more, but her behavior betrayed a different reality. She paid closer attention to his work than necessary, remembered details about his projects without effort, and occasionally adjusted priorities when his name appeared on reports. Daniel, meanwhile, remained consistent in his behavior. He treated every task with seriousness and respect, never seeking attention or advantage. His humility remained unchanged even as his responsibilities grew. That stability made him stand out even more in an environment driven by competition and ego. One afternoon, Daniel led a complex technical presentation in front of senior executives. The room was filled with pressure and expectation, yet his explanation remained calm and precise. He broke down structural challenges into practical solutions that others had overlooked. His clarity earned immediate respect. Sophia observed from the side of the room, watching him carefully. What struck her was not just his intelligence, but his presence under pressure. Daniel did not try to dominate the room. He simply understood it, and that understanding gave him influence without force. After the meeting, several executives praised Daniel's contribution. Sophia listened without reacting, but internally she acknowledged what others had begun to see. Daniel was no longer just capable, he was becoming essential. Later that evening, Daniel was called into Sophia's office once again. The atmosphere felt familiar, but slightly different, as if something unspoken had begun to settle between them over time. The conversation started with project updates, maintaining professional structure as always. Daniel responded with honesty and clarity, never exaggerating or attempting to impress. Sophia found herself listening more deeply than before, noticing not just his answers, but his reasoning. He approached problems with a grounded logic shaped by real experience rather than theory. At one point, Daniel gently mentioned that Sophia had been neglecting basic rest and meals again. It was said casually, without judgment, but it landed with unexpected weight. Few people in her life ever commented on her personal well-being, and even fewer did so with sincerity. Sophia dismissed it immediately, insisting she was managing fine. Daniel did not push. He simply accepted her response and continued the conversation. That acceptance lingered in her mind afterward, more powerful than any argument or insistence would have been. When Daniel left the office, the silence that followed felt different. It was no longer just emptiness or exhaustion. It felt like absence, as if something meaningful had briefly existed in the space and then disappeared. Vanessa entered shortly after and immediately noticed Sophia's expression. She made a light remark about distraction, but Sophia reacted more sharply than usual. Vanessa did not respond aggressively, but her concern deepened as she observed how much control Sophia was quietly losing over her own emotional reactions. That night, Sophia again reviewed Daniel's background files. She told herself it was standard evaluation, yet she already knew every detail. His academic success, his struggles, his persistence through failure. Each part of his story reinforced the same truth she was avoiding. Daniel had built himself through hardship, not advantage. His resilience was not theoretical. It was lived. That reality created a kind of respect in Sophia that she struggled to categorize or contain. Over time, Daniel's role in the company became increasingly important. His presence in meetings became expected, his input increasingly relied upon. Yet he never changed his demeanor. He remained steady, humble, and focused, regardless of recognition or responsibility. Sophia's awareness of him continued to grow in ways she did not openly acknowledge. She noticed his expressions during quiet moments, the way he listened before speaking, and the calm energy he brought into otherwise tense environments. Even when she forced herself to concentrate on business matters, thoughts of Daniel appeared without invitation. It was not disruptive at first, but it was persistent, like something quietly rewriting her internal focus over time. One evening, Daniel briefly stopped by her office after finishing work. The conversation was short, casual, and unplanned, yet it carried an ease that had become increasingly familiar between them, softening the edges of Sophia's usually rigid world. When he left, Sophia stood by the window for a long time, staring at the city she controlled but no longer fully felt connected to. She told herself nothing had changed, that everything remained under control. But somewhere deep inside, she understood that control was no longer as absolute as she once believed. Daniel's presence at Bennett Holdings had become fully integrated into the company's daily rhythm. What once felt like an outsider's arrival had now transformed into something expected, even relied upon. His voice carried weight in technical discussions, and his opinions were increasingly sought in decisions that shaped major projects. Sophia observed this evolution with a level of attention she did not openly acknowledge. She told herself it was simply leadership responsibility, ensuring that valuable talent was properly utilized. But the truth was more complicated. Daniel's presence no longer stayed within the boundaries of professional evaluation. It lingered in her thoughts long after meetings ended. Vanessa noticed the change with growing concern. Sophia's emotional restraint was still strong in public, but cracks were becoming visible in private moments. She would pause during conversations, lose focus unexpectedly, or fall silent when Daniel's name appeared in discussion. Vanessa understood what that usually meant, even if Sophia refused to admit it. Sophia continued insisting that Daniel was only a capable employee whose performance benefited the company. But her actions were no longer aligned with her words. She reviewed his work more frequently than necessary, paid attention to his schedules indirectly, and often found herself aware of his presence even when he was not in the room. Daniel, however, remained unchanged in his approach. He did not seek attention or validation beyond his responsibilities. His humility remained constant even as his influence grew. He treated every colleague with the same respect, regardless of rank, which quietly earned him trust across different levels of the organization. During one high-level technical presentation, Daniel demonstrated a level of clarity that impressed even senior executives. He broke down complex engineering challenges into practical solutions, offering insights that simplified problems others had struggled with for weeks. His delivery was calm, structured, and confident without arrogance. Sophia observed the entire presentation in silence. What stood out to her was not just his intelligence, but his composure under pressure. Daniel did not attempt to dominate the room. He simply understood it, and that understanding allowed him to guide it naturally. After the meeting, executives openly praised his contribution. Sophia listened without reacting outwardly, but internally she acknowledged what was becoming increasingly obvious. Daniel was no longer just a hired engineer. He was becoming a central figure in the company's operational success. Later that evening, Daniel was called into Sophia's office again. The setting was familiar, yet the atmosphere carried a subtle shift. The usual strict formality between CEO and employee was still present, but beneath it, something quieter had begun to form. The conversation began with routine project updates. Daniel responded with the same honesty and precision he always showed. He never embellished his achievements or tried to present himself as more than he was. That consistency made his presence feel steady in a world defined by pressure and performance. Sophia found herself listening more carefully than usual, not just to what he said, but how he thought. His reasoning was practical, shaped by real experience rather than theoretical confidence. It gave his words a grounded quality she rarely encountered in her professional environment. At one point, Daniel mentioned casually that she had been neglecting her basic health routines again. The comment was gentle, almost offhand, but it carried a level of awareness that surprised her. Few people noticed such details about her, and even fewer felt comfortable pointing them out. Sophia dismissed it immediately, insisting she was managing everything properly. Daniel did not argue or insist further. He simply accepted her response and continued speaking about the project. That lack of pressure stayed with her longer than expected, because it came from concern rather than control. When Daniel left the office, the silence that followed felt different from her usual solitude. It was not just emptiness, it felt like something had been present and then quietly removed, leaving behind an awareness she could not ignore. Vanessa entered shortly afterward and immediately noticed Sophia's distracted expression. She made a light comment, but Sophia responded more sharply than necessary. Vanessa did not push, but her concern deepened as she observed how consistently Daniel seemed to affect Sophia's emotional state. That night, Sophia once again reviewed Daniel's background file. She told herself it was standard professional diligence, yet she already knew every detail contained within it. His academic achievements, his struggles, and his persistence all painted a consistent picture of resilience. Daniel's life had been shaped not by privilege, but by endurance. Every success he had earned came through effort rather than advantage. That reality created a level of respect within Sophia that she could not easily categorize or dismiss. Over time, Daniel's role within the company continued to expand. His presence in meetings became expected, and his input increasingly influenced key decisions. Yet he never altered his behavior. He remained steady, grounded, and focused regardless of recognition. Sophia's awareness of him continued to deepen in subtle ways. She noticed small details she did not consciously choose to observe, from his tone during discussions to the calm way he handled conflict. Even when she tried to focus entirely on business, his presence remained in her thoughts. One evening, Daniel briefly stopped by her office after finishing his work. The conversation was short and informal, but it carried an ease that had become increasingly natural between them. For a few moments, the usual tension of her world softened. When he left, Sophia stood by the window for a long time, looking out at the city she controlled but no longer fully felt detached from. She told herself again that nothing had changed. But deep down, she understood that something had already shifted beyond her ability to reverse it. Daniel's presence inside Bennett Holdings had become so deeply embedded in the company's daily structure that most employees no longer viewed him as new. He was no longer the outsider who had arrived with hesitation and uncertainty. Instead, he had become someone whose presence felt stable, reliable, and increasingly essential to ongoing operations. Sophia noticed this transformation more than anyone else. She told herself it was simply the natural result of hiring capable talent. But her awareness of Daniel extended far beyond professional evaluation. He was no longer just part of her workforce. He had become part of her attention. Even when she refused to acknowledge it directly, Vanessa continued observing Sophia closely, recognizing patterns she had seen only rarely before. Sophia's emotional control remained intact publicly, but privately she showed subtle signs of distraction. Her focus drifted during meetings, and she occasionally paused when Daniel was mentioned, even in unrelated conversations. Despite all of this, Sophia continued to deny any personal connection. She insisted Daniel was simply a well-performing employee whose contributions benefited the company. Yet her behavior increasingly contradicted her words. She reviewed his reports more often than necessary and paid attention to his progress beyond professional requirement. Daniel, meanwhile, remained completely consistent in his behavior. He did not attempt to draw attention to himself or position himself above others. His approach remained grounded in discipline, humility, and quiet confidence, shaped by experience rather than privilege. One afternoon, Daniel led a detailed technical briefing involving senior engineers and department heads. The discussion was complex, yet his explanations were clear and structured. He broke down problems into practical solutions that others had struggled to identify, earning immediate respect in the room. Sophia observed the entire session silently. What stood out was not just his technical ability, but his composure under pressure. Daniel did not attempt to dominate the conversation. He simply understood the system deeply enough to guide it without force or ego. After the meeting, several executives openly praised Daniel's contribution. Sophia listened without outward reaction, but internally she acknowledged what was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. Daniel was no longer just competent. He was becoming influential within her organization. Later that evening, Daniel was called into Sophia's office again. The setting remained familiar, but something subtle had shifted in the atmosphere between them. The conversation began formally, focused on project updates, yet it gradually moved into a more natural rhythm as they spoke. Daniel answered questions with his usual honesty and clarity. He did not exaggerate, nor did he attempt to impress. Sophia found herself paying closer attention not just to his answers, but to the way he approached problems. His thinking was practical, shaped by lived experience rather than theoretical confidence. At one point, Daniel gently mentioned that Sophia had been neglecting her health again. It was said casually, without pressure, but it carried unexpected weight. Few people in her life ever commented on her well-being, and even fewer did so without fear of consequence. Sophia immediately dismissed the comment, insisting she was managing everything properly. Daniel did not argue. He simply accepted her response and continued the conversation. That acceptance lingered in her mind longer than she expected, because it carried no demand, only awareness. When Daniel left her office, the silence that followed felt different from her usual solitude. It was not empty in the same way as before. It felt like something had been present and then removed, leaving behind a trace she could not easily ignore. Vanessa entered shortly afterward and immediately noticed Sophia's distracted expression. She made a light comment, but Sophia responded more sharply than necessary. Vanessa did not press further, but her concern deepened as she continued observing how consistently Daniel affected Sophia's emotional state. That night, Sophia once again reviewed Daniel's file. She told herself it was professional due diligence, but she already knew every detail within it. His academic success, his failures, and his persistence all formed a consistent pattern of resilience under pressure. Daniel's life had been shaped by endurance rather than privilege. Every achievement represented effort and survival rather than advantage. That realization created a quiet respect within Sophia that she struggled to categorize or suppress. Over time, Daniel's role within the company continued to expand. His input became increasingly valued in key decisions, and his presence in meetings became expected. Yet he remained unchanged in demeanor, steady, grounded, and consistently focused on his responsibilities. Sophia's awareness of him continued to grow in ways she could not fully control. She noticed details she did not consciously seek, from his tone during discussions to the calm way he navigated conflict. Even when she forced herself to focus entirely on business, he remained present in her thoughts. One evening, Daniel briefly stopped by her office after finishing work. The conversation was short and informal, yet it carried a sense of ease that had become increasingly familiar between them. For a few moments, the usual weight of her world felt slightly lighter. When he left, Sophia remained by the window for a long time, looking out at the city she controlled but no longer experienced with full emotional distance. She told herself again that nothing had changed. But deep inside, she already understood that something had shifted beyond her control. Daniel's presence inside Bennett Holdings had become deeply woven into the company's daily rhythm. What began as an unexpected hire had evolved into something far more stable and influential. His contributions were no longer questioned or overlooked. They were expected, respected, and often relied upon during critical decisions. Sophia continued to observe this progression with quiet intensity. She told herself it was purely professional evaluation, a CEO ensuring her company functioned at its highest level. But her attention toward Daniel was no longer limited to performance alone. It followed him into spaces she did not consciously choose. Vanessa remained increasingly concerned as she watched Sophia's behavior shift in subtle but undeniable ways. Sophia still maintained her composed exterior, but moments of distraction became more frequent. She would pause mid-thought, lose focus during meetings, or grow silent whenever Daniel was mentioned unexpectedly. Despite this, Sophia refused to acknowledge anything beyond professionalism. She insisted Daniel was simply a valuable asset to the company. Yet her behavior told a different truth. She paid closer attention to his work than necessary, remembered details about his schedule indirectly, and noticed his presence even when he was not in the room. Daniel, however, remained steady and unchanged. He continued working with discipline and humility, never attempting to elevate himself above others or seek unnecessary attention. His consistency became one of his strongest traits within the company environment. One afternoon, Daniel led a critical technical discussion involving senior engineers and executives. The topic was complex, involving structural challenges and high financial risk. Yet his explanation remained calm, structured, and practical. He broke down each issue with clarity that made difficult problems seem manageable. Sophia observed silently from the side of the room. What stood out was not just Daniel's intelligence, but his presence under pressure. He did not dominate the space or attempt to assert superiority. He simply understood the problem deeply enough to guide others through it naturally. After the meeting, executives openly acknowledged Daniel's contribution. Sophia listened without reaction, but internally she recognized what was becoming increasingly undeniable. Daniel was no longer just competent. He was becoming essential to the way her company operated. Later that evening, Daniel was called into Sophia's office once again. The setting remained familiar, but the emotional tone between them had subtly evolved over time. The conversation began with structured updates, yet gradually shifted into a more natural flow. Daniel answered questions with honesty and clarity, never exaggerating or attempting to impress. Sophia found herself listening more closely than before, not only to his words, but to his reasoning. His perspective was shaped by real experience rather than theoretical confidence, and that difference stood out to her. At one point, Daniel mentioned gently that Sophia had been neglecting her health again. It was not said as criticism, but as concern. The comment landed differently than it would have from anyone else. It was simple, observant, and sincere. Sophia dismissed it immediately, insisting she was managing everything properly. Daniel did not argue or push further. He simply accepted her response and continued speaking about work. That lack of pressure lingered with her longer than expected, because it reflected understanding rather than control. When Daniel left her office, the silence that followed felt different from her usual solitude. It was no longer just emptiness. It felt like presence had been removed, leaving behind something unspoken in its absence. Vanessa entered shortly afterward and immediately noticed Sophia's distracted state. She made a light remark, but Sophia responded more sharply than necessary. Vanessa did not press the issue, but her concern deepened as she continued observing the growing emotional impact Daniel had on her friend. That night, Sophia once again reviewed Daniel's background file. She told herself it was standard professional evaluation, but she had already memorized every detail. His academic achievements, his struggles, and his persistence all reflected a consistent pattern of resilience. Daniel's life had been shaped by endurance rather than privilege. Every accomplishment he carried had been earned through persistence under pressure. That reality created a quiet but powerful respect within Sophia that she struggled to suppress or categorize. Over time, Daniel's role within the company continued to expand. His presence became standard in important meetings, and his input increasingly influenced decisions. Yet he remained unchanged in character, steady, humble, and focused regardless of recognition. Sophia's awareness of him deepened in subtle ways she did not openly acknowledge. She noticed his expressions during quiet moments, the way he listened before speaking, and the calm stability he brought into tense environments. Even when she forced her attention entirely onto business matters, Daniel remained present in her thoughts in ways she could not fully control. It was not disruptive, but persistent, like something quietly reshaping her internal focus. One evening, Daniel briefly visited her office after finishing work. The conversation was short and informal, yet it carried a familiarity that had slowly developed between them. For a brief moment, the weight of her structured world felt lighter. When he left, Sophia stood by the window for a long time, staring out at the city she controlled but no longer experienced with full emotional distance. She repeated to herself that nothing had changed, but deep inside, she already understood that something had shifted beyond her control. Everything changed the moment Sophia stopped pretending. For months, she had told herself that Daniel was only a professional addition to her empire, a capable engineer, a useful mind, a structured employee inside a structured system. But standing alone in her office that night, looking out at the endless city lights, she finally stopped lying to herself. Daniel was not just part of her company anymore. He had become part of her thoughts, her silence, and the space between her decisions. The realization did not come with drama. It came with exhaustion, the kind of exhaustion that builds when someone has been fighting their own emotions for too long. Sophia leaned against the glass window, her reflection faint and distant, as if she was looking at a version of herself she no longer fully controlled. She thought about every moment again. The rainy roadside meeting, the calm way he fixed her broken car, the way he never feared her status, the way he spoke to her like she was not a billionaire, but a human being. And then she thought about something more dangerous, the way she felt when he was near. Not power, not control, not calculation, something softer, something she had buried years ago and refused to name again. Love. Sophia closed her eyes tightly, as if that single word could still be denied. But it was too late. Denial no longer worked. Across the city, Daniel was still at work, completely unaware of the emotional storm he had unknowingly created inside her. He was focused on deadlines, reports, and technical improvements. He still believed everything between them was stable, professional, and safely defined by structure. But Sophia now understood something he did not. Nothing between them was simple anymore. The next morning, she arrived at Bennett Holdings earlier than everyone else. The building was quiet, almost empty, but her mind was louder than ever. For the first time in a long time, she was not thinking about markets, investments, or expansion. She was thinking about him. Vanessa found her in the office shortly after, immediately noticing the change in atmosphere. Sophia was not distracted in the usual way. This was deeper, more internal, more personal. Vanessa did not speak immediately. She already knew. Sophia finally broke the silence herself, her voice calm but heavy. She admitted nothing directly, but Vanessa understood everything anyway. The truth did not need explanation anymore. Meanwhile, Daniel continued his routine as usual: meetings, engineering reports, site inspections. He remained steady, focused, unaware that the emotional foundation beneath his relationship with Sophia had already begun to shift. He still saw her as the powerful CEO who had given him a chance when no one else would. That gratitude shaped everything he did. Respect defined every interaction. Boundaries remained clear in his mind, but Sophia was no longer standing in the same emotional place. She watched him differently now, not as an employee, not as a professional asset, but as something far more complicated. Someone she had begun to care about in a way she could no longer control. One evening, after a long day of work, Daniel stopped by her office. It was routine at first. Project updates, technical adjustments, professional exchange. But the silence between sentences felt heavier than before. There were pauses now that neither of them filled immediately. Moments where eye contact lingered a second too long. Subtle shifts, neither fully acknowledged. Daniel noticed it first, but he did not understand it. Sophia noticed it too, but she understood it too well. When he finally left, she did not immediately return to her work. She stayed still, hands resting on the desk, staring at nothing in particular. Her empire was stable, her company was growing, her reputation was intact. But internally, something had already started breaking open. Not destruction. Awakening. And for the first time in years, Sophia Bennett was no longer certain she was in full control of her own heart.